everyone, and welcome to another video where I am still avoiding the elephant in the room of the Ukraine versus Russia war. Today instead I'm going to go through a little article from conservative magazine The Mallard. Link in the description to their website as usual. I would seriously go give them a look, they do some good stuff. But I wanted to go through this article, why we will no longer publish the word woke. Now, as an editorial decision, I think that's perfectly reasonable for the Mallard to choose not to publish a particular word. I'm sure they also would never publish the N-word, for example. So banning particular words from publication I don't particularly have issues with. It's more the argumentation within the article that I find somewhat questionable. So I'm using it more as a springboard to go through language in the modern day, really, because woke really does seem to have come from nowhere, but everyone seems to know what it means. And I actually happen to think it's quite a useful word, especially with modern politics. So, without further ado, here we go. As of today, the Mallard is no longer publishing articles that include the word woke in either print or online. Too many submissions, not just to the Mallard, but other publications have become reliant on this word to explain away current trends that people find unappealing, yet cannot articulate why beyond anything other than this word. It is the responsibility of all outlets to contribute to the public discourse, and when a word, concept, idea, or individual fails to contribute to the discourse, they have to be removed. So already I think the reasoning is a little bit wonky. I'm perfectly fine with the Mallard saying we don't want to publish articles that are basically just waffle, and if they just say woke without going into further reasoning as to why this woke thing is bad, then yeah, fair enough. I can see why you wouldn't want to publish it or why you'd send it back saying, look, stop using the word woke, try and use a different word, or try and actually explain what you mean here. But that's not just what they're saying. They're saying if a word, in this particular case, woke, isn't contributing to the public discourse anymore, it needs to be removed. Which isn't how language works. A publication doesn't generally decide what words are useful and what words aren't to the public discourse. If they don't like it within the discourse on their website or their magazine or publication or whatever, yeah, fair enough, remove it then. Because it's kind of implied here that woke is only used in this context, and to be fair, the article does go through other reasons for getting rid of the word, but it is implied here that the word woke is only used because people can't explain what they mean beyond I don't like something that's vaguely left-wing, which I wouldn't agree is how the word woke is used, but I'll let the article go on. When pundits of the right use woke, they are using a word spawned by the online left to denote their being awake to injustices of the world, which are usually spawned from an ideological conviction rather than an actual understanding of the complex issues of the world. It suggests these people, the woke left, are awake to things that we are not, and if they have some deep insights that surpasses the average person. It is simply the latest expression of real consciousness derived from Marxism. Of course, we all know that the word is used sarcastically, but to use it at all is to make the eternal mistake of the right, and to fight the left on their own terms. We've been making this mistake for 70 years, and to reverse this trend we need to stop appealing to their language, their values, their goals. So this is an argument to say, don't use the language of the left, because that, by implication, means that we accept their framework. And that's fair enough. I also try and avoid using the left's language as much as I can. However, with the word woke, I'd be more sympathetic to this article if it was written about 5 years ago. Because while dictionaries today do define the word as alert to injustice in society, especially racism, but it can also mean sexism, homophobia, etc., the word got co-opted by the right not too long after, and even the left started to find it going out of fashion by 2017. For example, I'll go to Old Faithful, The Guardian. In late 2017, they made this unironic article saying cinema got woke in 2017, but it's only the beginning, implying that woke is a good thing, meaning cinema is waking up to injustices in society and making films about it. If we look a little earlier in 2017 on The Guardian, they are also using the word woke to point out that it's being co-opted, especially at this time, by advertisers. Faking wokeness, how advertising targets millennial liberals for profit. So clearly different writers at The Guardian are using the word woke in different ways already, some realising it was going to be a pejorative earlier than others. And you fast forward to 2020, there's even an article saying how the word woke was weaponised by the right. So we can at the very least say, even 2 years ago, that the word woke was no longer a left-wing term. It is pretty much exclusively used as a pejorative against basically low-level left-wing activism, or leftist activism I should say. The most recent being Disney promising to make half of their new characters gay. So what we're doing at this point is waiting for the dictionaries to catch up. So back to the article, but even when the word is used derisively it adds virtually nothing. Issues around pronouns and bathrooms pale in comparison to the economic, cultural and demographic changes brought about by respective trends of globalism, liberalism and immigration. When they say liberalism they tend to mean progressivism. There is nothing substantially different in the current cultural trends than in previous cultural trends. What is happening today should not be described with a new word, because what is happening today is not new. That is the reality of where we are now. Woke is not sufficiently different from what came before it to really merit a separate topic of discussion. It is just an extension of the logic of the sexual revolution, the civil rights era, and the great liberalisation of the last 60 years. So with the first part of this paragraph, yeah, I agree. If you don't think it adds anything, I think it's completely fine to not publish the word anymore. And I do agree that the word woke is pretty much exclusively used mockingly to left-wing low-level issues. So they're fine to use in, say, streams or in casual articles and things like that. But the Mallard's saying here is that they want to focus on more serious issues than just simple things like pronouns or... I mean, I think the bathroom argument's a bit more serious, but still, they think that's low level. And if you're not bothering covering issues like that, why would you bother having words that vaguely describe issues like that? Like, okay, fair enough. If that was a statement alone, I probably wouldn't make this video. But it isn't. He basically has to contradict himself. So far in this article, it's been explained that the word woke is used sarcastically and mockingly to describe vaguely leftist positions on issues, like with the example I gave before, Disney saying that half their new characters are going to be gay. But then they say what's happening now isn't new, which to a degree I can agree with. What we're seeing at the moment is what inevitably happens when institutions such as universities and media are just jam-packed full of postmodern neo-Marxists. Eventually they influence pretty much everything. As we can clearly see today with Gláeddyv even being in the NHS, basically saying that all white people in the NHS need to read Robin DiAngelo's White Privilege. But really these ideas that stem from Ibram X. Kendi and other critical race theorists and things like that, no, what they have done is co-opted what the civil rights movement was going for. This is a completely different direction to what Martin Luther King wanted, for example. But these people followed Gramsci's long march through the institutions, and now we're seeing the end game of that, and people don't like it. So they waited for the civil rights movement to get all their things done. You know, they've basically got racial equality, and they basically had it in the 90s, and then they went further, not focusing on whether black people can get the bus along with white people anymore, and instead saying, why are black people underrepresented in X, Y and Z institution? And that's generally what the word woke is used to mock. It's, oh, well, there aren't enough black people, or there isn't enough diversity here, and the reply is just, oh, shut up, you woke moron. But it's not then used for actual institutional racism against, say, white girls in Rotherham. No one is saying that the grooming gang scandal is woke, or due to woke politics. And I think you'd be hard-pressed to find an example where someone is talking about the grooming gangs and they use the word woke. Though don't get me wrong, I'm sure it's happened, because people in podcasts and streams say stupid things sometimes. But anyway, back to the article. One of our assistant editors, William Yarwood, last year recorded a short podcast begging us to stop calling groups like Antifa-fascists or the left the real racists, and recognise that they are just communists. Stop calling the left woke as a shorthand for a broad range of things you just don't like. Yeah, see, this is the difference. The word woke isn't just used to say, this is left-wing and I don't like it. Believe it or not, a lot of people don't like what's happened with the Rotherham and other town grooming gangs. They don't call it woke, though. It is useless to say, look, I agree with what they stand for, I just don't like how they're going about it. Then your disagreement is technical and not fundamental, so really, you're just the ones pulling the brakes on their movement. They will come for you eventually, so you might as well recognise that now. Okay, yeah, I don't agree that using the word woke means that you agree with them fundamentally, you just disagree with their tactics. Because as mentioned before, the word woke's completely changed its meaning. Because I don't think Jake Scott would say that people who've written for the Mallard and use the word woke agree with what leftists stand for. Calling something woke is a lazy caricature that lets what passes for the right-wing commentariat get away with murder. The liberals of yesteryear are allowed to displace conservative voices in the media, politics and culture. Yeah, I'll agree with that. I don't think Lauren Fox would be considered right-wing 5 years ago, let alone 10 years ago. They pretend in their sarcastic overtones that leftists are weak and hypersensitive, when in reality they want to put children on hormone blockers, let men into women's changing rooms, open our borders to people who hate us, and teach the next generation that they have nothing to gain from a civilization that birthed them. No, see, again, I've never heard anyone refer to the Tavistock Centre, the centre in the UK that's giving kids as young as 10 hormone blockers. I have never seen anyone refer to that or that issue as woke. And I'm really confused that earlier in the article they were implying that the bathroom debate was a really low-level issue where there are more important cultural issues, but then here they use the example of men going into women's changing rooms as this, well, really horrific thing that's on par with giving kids hormone blockers. Just seems that if you use the 3 examples of cultural, economic and demographic issues, like they're the big issues you want, you'd think you use 3 examples from that, but instead they use 2 cultural ones and a demographic one. But hey, that's just something I found a bit confusing. The article goes on. These individuals are not weak. These people are not hypersensitive. Instead, they pass laws to put people in prison if they so much as joke about them. I don't think it's so much that they've joked about left-wing activists, or strong left-wing activists, I should say. People who are generally put in prison for any amount of time who've joked about things, it's usually because it's kind of got a racial line to it, or something like that. The notion that these people are weak is a reflection of decades of failure of conservatives to actually do anything about them. If these individuals were weak, they would not find it so easy to break down the barriers that protect the most vulnerable in society, women and children. Yeah, that's true. These are not just simple activists, by the way. They are in our institutions, running our universities, pioneering our civil service, decolonising our curricula, all the while entrenching their culture by building parallel careers that have no real-world purpose or function. That is absolutely true. I've said this before, but with the example of the NHS blog I mentioned before, where you were told, oh, read all these things about white privilege, it's the same people that are constantly helping each other up, saying, read these people, and then they'll all say, oh, read these other people who've lifted me up, and it's pretty incestuous. The massive, tumorous growth of the human resources machine has seen it that busybody, unemployable humanities graduates have a reason to exist once more. Only now it is self-perpetuating cancer that simultaneously cannot abide the existence of leftist heresy, whilst relying on it like a parasite. Like, yeah, sure, people call human resources departments woke, but again, it's generally for low-level things, like when a HR department says, oh, all people need to put pronouns in their signatures in their work emails now. But if someone gets fired for expressing their rather not left-wing opinions outside of work, no one really calls that woke. But generally those were 2 pretty good paragraphs that I don't really have anything to add to. And as we see continuously, the online right is just as bad. If there are necessary discussions about poverty, living crises, genuine injustice that actually harm people's lives, the right shrieks woke in such hypersensitive way that the actual discussion disappears behind parody and caricature. Again, I don't see that generally, and this is one of the weirdest parts of the article for me. Talk Radio's infamous Mike Graham recently told an Extinction Rebellion member that we can grow concrete in an effort to own the libs, to which the XR member, who is stupid for different reasons, was left speechless. By consequence, Mike Graham made Extinction Rebellion look reasonable, an own goal, if ever there was one. Yeah, see, this is what's weird. Why would you say, oh, the right wing are really bad for using the word woke, and then have an example where the word woke isn't even uttered? That's really weird to me. This is evidence that in no way has anything to do with your point, I'm afraid. Because I do get the point that, oh, if the right wing overuse the word woke and use it where it's not relevant, then it will make the left look slightly better to normies. As, for example, Mike Graham did in that example, because you can't grow concrete. But if you want to push that point, you really need an example of someone saying, oh, X, Y, or Z is woke, when it clearly isn't, and leaves a left-wing activist so stunned because it would be a stupid thing to say. But for some reason, an example of that isn't put forward here, leaving me quite confused. Anyway, the article continues, when war broke out in Ukraine, it was necessary for the right to attempt to make sense of it. This was done well in some circles, with people drawing attention to the realist school regardless of your thoughts on the realist school. It was undoubtedly an intellectual contribution to the discourse. Fine. If you looked at the mainstream discourse, however, you would know nothing of this contribution. Instead, it became another flashpoint to discuss this word. those they associate with it, and how these people were weak, hypersensitive, and made it so we were incapable of fighting a war against Putin. It couldn't possibly be that the nuclear war is a possibility, or even, as the neoconservative lobby implicitly recognises, but refuses to admit, that we have nothing to gain from getting involved in the war. No, it must be the woke. We end up with some perverse eternal spy versus spy scenario, where woke warriors seek out racism, sexism, whateverism, in a place where they can't find it, while the common sense rightists only try to define what they consider woke to make it work, rather than criticise it on its own grounds. Right, so this is a better example of what should have been put in the last paragraph. But even so, I didn't see this, and from what I can find on Google, it didn't happen. And what I mean by that is that publications that are now considered to be on the right wing weren't trying to write about wokeness to try and distract from the serious issue that is a war in Eastern Europe. For example, The Telegraph wrote, "War in Ukraine has exposed just how shallow the self-obsessed woke worldview really is. The whole edifice of identity politics has created an inward-looking delusion about what really matters." So this isn't just talking about the word woke, and this is actually doing the opposite. This isn't trying to avoid the issue of Ukraine at all. It is trying to say there's a really serious problem going on now, and these moronic leftists can only complain that people care about it, basically. And the whole article is about how woke is just a distraction from important issues. The US military, instead of ruthlessly planning the anti-Russia, anti-China or anti-Iran deterrence on which the free world will depend, has been indulging in stand-downs, days in which normal training is suspended in favour of workshops on the perils of white supremacy and other woke preoccupations. There is never any training on leftist extremism, such as the looting or rioting favoured by Antifa in America. And the next paragraph makes it even more clear. The war on Ukraine has shown up, or should have shown up, the perverse narrowness of identity ideology and its diversionary parapolitical morality. Indeed, the ironies are almost too painful. Wokeness has normalised the gross misapplication of accusations of imperialism, violence and the destruction of safety. It's expended years of energy raging at things like cultural appropriation, a form of colonialism, it says, in which someone from one culture apparently conquers something allegedly trademarked by another, a white person wearing dreadlocks for instance, or in extreme cases, cooking Asian food. And so then if we move further over to the left on the what is considered right-wing space at this point, we have the magazine Spiked, and Brendan O'Neill, the most left-wing, right-wing person I know. I think he still self-identifies as a Marxist. It's really weird. So he says how wokeness is torpedoing the solidarity with Ukraine. Identity politics is the incapable enemy of human solidarity. And while this is probably the best example you'll find of someone who could be considered on the right, but actually agrees with quite a lot of fundamental ideological positions of leftists that I could find, even this article is stating that no, we need to talk about more serious stuff, and wokeists are basically getting people so fed up with their identity politics that they are making people look into more serious stuff on the Ukraine. Though, to be fair, it is still all mainstream. So Brendan says, what is happening here is that some Western journalists and activists, what's the difference these days, are projecting their Western-centric navel-gazing and woke politics of race on a situation that is far more complicated than that. How can they live with themselves, is what I want to know. What did you do during the great Russo-Ukrainian war, mummy? I implied that Ukrainians are racist shit, sweetheart. Well done. The woke Westerners, who seem to imply that Ukrainian officials are anti-black and anti-African, are unwittingly playing into the Putin's hands. They are potentially contributing to his claim that Ukraine is a hotbed of regression and fascism. Now look, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying here that Brendan Neil is anywhere close to as interesting as a realist school article. What he is saying is that these ideas need to be wiped out because they are at best completely useless and at worst helping what he considers to be the enemy. And yes, a lot of mainstream publications are saying this. The Times, The Telegraph, even The Spectator does it obviously. But the problem is that they have to keep publishing things like that because it's not going away. And from every article I've read on it, it does seem to directly criticise wokeism, woke politics, whatever. They clearly say it's a problem and needs to be gone. I don't agree that these people, apart from maybe Brendan O'Neill there, agree with the fundamental principles, because the fundamental principles are basically saying that racism is okay against white people, sexism is okay against men, and apparently the ends of this equality justify putting kids on hormone blockers and justify a massive cover-up of grooming gangs. You see, woke is the small scale stuff. Woke is the blogs that you see going about saying, read white privilege, and saying things like, isn't it awful that we only care about a war when white people are involved? That's the low level woke stuff. When it eventually grows into these horrific means, nobody uses the word woke anymore. So if the Mallard are okay with just avoiding all those small scale things, that's completely fine. I don't have a problem with that. But I think a lot of argumentation against using the word here either wasn't needed or wasn't properly thought through. Honestly, all this needed to be was a tweet saying, we think it's a low-level and rather useless term for what we're trying to do here, so we're not going to publish any more articles with the word in. That's all it had to be, but for some reason this article had to be made that keeps adding on to that. And I also agree that people who are considered on the right who wouldn't be right-wing 10 years ago, like Lauren Fox and, as I pointed out there, Brendan O'Neill, I agree that the main reason they keep writing these articles and keep bringing up these issues of wokeness is because they're really easy targets. And while yes, they might not necessarily add anything new, I don't think they need to. This is a war of attrition because we're getting new woke things every day. We're in clown decade here. And these things are only going to get worse. So you want everyone you can, even if they aren't fundamentally against the big issues here. You have to fight these battles on multiple fronts, so let them do that, while at the same time, okay, you can avoid using the word woke, but don't then write an article then trying to imply that you're better than them, because then they're just going to start seeing you as a person that they're not going to like and potentially as an enemy, which you don't need to do. Which is what the Mallard do with this last sentence. So we are not publishing the word any longer. Here is a list of publications that are likely interested. The Sun, Talk Radio, The Critic, Compact, Breitbart, GB News. I'm sure they will find your work fascinating. We won't. See, it's this blanket ban on, oh, if we get sent anything with the word woke in, just instant no. Which I don't think is the right approach to this. I think the better approach is to say, as an editor, hey, you're using the word woke here. I think you need to be more specific in what you mean here. The word woke's too general. It's too loose. It means too many different things. We'd rather this be a bit more specific. But that's not what you do here. You are basically saying, we're better than all these publications. We think you're a dum-dum. So you need to go off to these dum-dum publications such as GB News, Breitbart, whatever, because that's a place for the unenlightened. And I just don't think that's a good approach to it. I think you're getting rid of quite a lot of potentially fascinating articles and fascinating reads just because some people use a word you don't like. But having said that, I do think it's a particularly useful word. It is an insult that means something. It means you are a moron, you don't see the bigger picture, and your answers are at best completely useless and at worst completely undermine the society and civilization which has given you everything. So if you were thinking of writing to the Mallard with the word woke in your article, please send it to the Wellington Project. Links in the description. But seriously, keep sending your articles to both the Wellington Project and the Mallard. We are both interested in having a load of articles that are potentially fascinating reads. But that's everything I had for you today. So, as usual, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.